Hi, happy Sunday. So today's conversation is on communication and more specifically poor communication. Before I start, it's important for me to say that this will most likely end up being at least 20 minutes. It's impossible for me to get in as much information as I can, what is, useful, relevant, and relatable information cannot be transferred in 5 or 6 minutes. So feel free to pause this along the way, come back when you can, take time to digest it over a couple of days, and more importantly, use what is useful and reject the rest. I don't have the intention to come across as being an expert in anything that I have to say. I merely offer perspective, right? And so from the perspective that I share, you are then free to draw your own conclusions and use what is useful and relevant for yourself. So the point of Cellular Life Institute really is to bridge East and West, right? So if you've been onto the website, you will see that the wording on there is about integrating East and West. And so the information in the talks that I put out on YouTube is very much that as well. It's bridging understanding between Asian and Eastern philosophy, and then from what we know from Western healthcare and Western education. Somewhere in between, we try to build a bridge between these two worlds and propel ourselves forward in terms of personal growth and development much quicker. So the reason that I've chosen the topic on communication, and specifically poor communication, is that as usual, everywhere I am, at the moment I'm in North America, in Canada, wherever I am, every country provides me with an opportunity to learn culturally. And what I've been finding within Canada is that people speak incredibly fast, right? Incredibly fast. Personally, I have really been struggling with the style of communication. I don't know if it's necessarily the town that I'm in or the city that I'm in, or the culture or the North American culture as a whole. But in comparison to pretty much every other country in the world that I've lived and traveled through, Canada is proving to be quite a challenge in terms of the style of communication here. So from an Asian perspective, or within Asia, and when I say Asia, of course, all of the countries within Asia also have differing approaches in terms of their communication. But one thing that is very common within all Asian countries, whether this, I put a blanket across China, Japan, South Korea, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and India, is that the style of communication is very low on the aggression scale, and it's very low on the, shall we say, personal ego scale, right? So in Asia, people don't want to be seen as necessarily being like an expert, right? They speak from a place of humility. Specifically countries like, or in fact all countries, but definitely the Japanese culture is very much one of humility. So it tends to be a lot more soft or gentle in their approach. The words can still be very direct, and you can still, be speaking with authority, but authority doesn't necessarily have to be stern, and it doesn't have to be aggressive. And it definitely, the pace is a lot slower in that people really think before they address others. There is clear intention behind the words that they speak before communication is delivered. So within yoga, there is a very clear understanding that your words carry power, and therefore you need to be clear on your intention before you say things, and the way in which you deliver words that are spoken is very, very important, because they have the capacity to cause harm. So anything that has the capacity to cause harm should be used very carefully, and this includes words. Now, what I've been finding in Canada is that people speak incredibly quickly, and with this fast pace of communication, there simply is no possibility for there to be very much thought behind what is being delivered, purely because your nervous system doesn't work with clarity at the space at which people are speaking. So my personal experience of this has been quite interesting. A few weeks ago, I rented a car, and the man who was speaking to me was speaking so quickly, I finally had to put my hands in front of me. And it was almost like an act of self-defense, because it felt like this guy was shooting me with words, right? The intensity that this language was coming across was very aggressive and fast paced, and so fast I couldn't, and it was just a sea of words, and I couldn't understand a single thing that he was saying. So after probably, it felt like ages, but it was probably only 2 or 3 minutes, I finally put my hands in front of me and said, stop, I can't, I don't understand a thing that you've just said. And you're not communicating. You're shooting me with words, but you're not communicating. So this has been happening constantly over the last few months. I do understand, and I do realize, having moved around and lived in many places, I do realize very clearly that there is a process of culture shock that we go through. It takes a few months to amalgamate into a culture, to understand people, to integrate as much as you can. You don't necessarily have to change who you are entirely. It's important that you still have a sense of self within yourself, which I very much do. But it is necessary to understand how to interact with people. And this style of communication, the conclusion that I've now drawn is that people are simply not communicating. So there is when we understand communication is that one person is delivering words or some form of communication, which may be verbal or non-verbal. So unspoken language is more accurate for me. Having lived in so many countries where I just simply didn't share a common verbal language, we do always share a common non-verbal language. So our body language, regardless of the country or the culture or the language that you place yourself in, body language is always the more accurate of the two, whether it's spoken or unspoken, right? So this is the language that I rely on entirely. No matter where I am, I rely entirely on unspoken language. And I think this also has to do very much with the fact that I am a masseuse and I do massage, and I rely very much on the language that is transmitted through my hands. So what I'm actually feeling on a person's body is far more accurate than the words that actually come out of their mouth. So I do realize that my own personal style of communication might be somewhat different to what we find in the mainstream. It's not that these things are necessarily right or wrong. I share these perspectives as food for thought for people to actually maybe just understand or take some time to consider how they themselves are communicating. So me personally, from the perspective of an early childhood development specialist or early childhood development practitioner, one of the things that we always teach children is to use their words, right? So when they start responding with a large-scale emotion, or we don't understand them, or they're whining, or they're crying, or they behaving in a way where they are not using verbal communication clearly, one of the first things that we teach humans is to use their words clearly. And in order to use your words clearly, you need to slow down, speak clearly, and ensure that the other person that you're speaking to actually receives the message that's being relayed, right? So obviously it's a bit like a cable, or like a nerve, like a electrical wire. If one side has got energy that's going through, but it's blocked and the information is not actually transferring or relaying all the way through, then we're going to end up with a fire. We're going to end up with a meltdown on this cable. So the very same thing can be said for the form of communication that is utilized by humans. If the information is not being relayed, then it's not communication. It's just simply a delivery of words, or it's just simply like it's almost like in this instance with me, it really did feel like this person was just shooting a bunch of information at me, shooting a bunch of data, and I was just getting absolutely hammered and I had no concept of what was actually being said. So the other thing that I've also found within Canada, or within North America, but specifically with where I am being in Canada, is that people can be incredibly loud. So for example, being in a store or being like in a supermarket or something and waiting to pay, I personally find it very hard, all this very loud input of conversations. People don't seem to have an awareness of how much space they actually take up, right? So it's almost, this is very different from East and West, because in Asia, people are very aware of emotional hygiene. So emotional hygiene is pretty much like, like physical hygiene, in that you don't leave your house smelling bad. You don't pour your emotional toxicity over an entire environment. And so this is also very interesting in terms of amalgamating and kind of understanding a cultural perspective, is that I almost feel like emotional hygiene is not something that people have very much awareness of. So they speak about very personal or very private things very loud in public without any awareness of who may or may not want to actually hear what they're speaking about. So this is kind of interesting. Either the form of communication is particularly fast-paced, in which the receiver of the information could not possibly process what is being said, almost as if they're trying to like run away as fast as possible, say a bunch of words and then just get away as quick as possible in case there's some kind of repercussion. Or they speak very, very loudly about very personal things in public places. So I find this very interesting in terms of personal boundaries, and also just common courtesy of the other people that are in the environment around them. So what's important, what I want to share just from a Western standpoint in terms of understanding hormones and how our human bodies are very, very interesting, and they're very intricate. Sometimes the human body is particularly simple, but it's also very intricate in terms of its functioning. So the link between hormones and communication is that we have a lot of hormones that are in our body, but we have a small group that are essentially like our primary hormones are pretty much serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, and cortisol. So cortisol is a stress hormone. And I realize very much now more so than ever that this incredibly fast pace of communication that I'm experiencing in Canada very much has to do with the levels of stress that people are living under. So high levels of cortisol make people function faster and faster and faster. So this is your stress hormone. It's your fight, flight, or flee hormone that gets produced when you feel like you're under pressure, when there's a lot of stuff going on. Your cortisol levels are very high. Now, when your cortisol levels are very high, your oxytocin level is very low. Now, oxytocin, I've mentioned before, oxytocin is your bonding hormone. This is the one that we need for social interaction and for bonding, for social bonding. Oxytocin is needed. So the other interesting thing that I've been finding in Canada is that people are bonding to animals. Animal ownership is definitely very high on people's list of priorities here. A large portion of disposable income is spent on the ownership of dogs. So on one hand, this is, it's beneficial and it is, it's pleasant and it's useful. On the other side, it's not entirely beneficial, because it seems like the bonding that is necessary for healthy communities and for healthy families and healthy societies is being replaced with dogs. So people are losing their social skills. They're losing the ability to relate to one another. They're losing the ability to connect to and bond to one another. So we've got a challenge in terms of the health, the emotional and the mental health of our society at the moment is very much challenged by social media and the digital age. And now what I'm seeing in terms of animal ownership is that this is another one of the challenges. So between bonding to animals and then also replacing human interaction, replacing direct human interaction with the internet or social media, and consistently having a buffer between humans, not being able to actually interact with one another one-on-one, but consistently having this buffer either with animals or with social media. is really not healthy for our mental and emotional well-being and for healthy societal connections. This really is unbeneficial. So from a professional perspective, from a work-related perspective, and from from an employment perspective as well, having the ability to communicate is a very, very important skill that is necessary. Having the ability to actually relate to people and have healthy social interactions is very, very important. And I specifically say healthy social interactions. So this is not interactions where people are bonding over alcohol, drugs, or dysfunction. These are not healthy social interactions. Healthy social interactions are one in which people can relate to one another without the need to escape, or without the need to kind of have this buffer between one another. So this is also where the understanding of oxytocin comes in, because oxytocin has to do with our ability to trust one another. So I feel that I'm sharing this also because at the moment I'm in the middle of an IT program that is involved with a group of amazingly skilled women. And communication and the lack of communication is something that has come up with this group of women as well. So it's not, my interactions and my experiences that I'm having within Canada, I'm taking from a very large pool of interactions and different kinds of people that I'm interacting with. And I'm finding it very interesting that again and again, in various interactions and in various environments, this conversation of having a blockage, having an obstacle to communication is consistently coming up. Now, this also has to do with, people feeling like they're being controlled, people feeling like there's this whole need to know, like I'm not going to give you this information because you don't really need to know it, which leaves people feeling distrustful, like they don't really know what's going on, they don't know the full picture. So for us to actually be able to collaborate as humans, to have healthy social interactions and to be able to collaborate, have healthy businesses, be successful in our, within our professional as well as in our personal relationships, we need to have a foundation of trust, and we need to have a foundation of being able to actually communicate with one another slowly, clearly, and have the ability to ensure that the person that you're speaking to is actually receiving the message that you are relaying. So there needs to be intentional thought process behind the words that is being relayed. Now, from a perspective, from a yogic perspective, there is a clear understanding that this area of your body, where the voice is generated from, is very, very important. And if there is a blockage here, the energy and the heat that is created or transformed from your food source or from just being a normal human, this energy needs to be utilized and expressed or delivered ideally through your voice. This area of your body is very, very important. So when there is a lack of communication, or when there is a blockage of communication for whatever reason, whether it's from traumatic stress, I'm speaking about this because Cellular Life Institute is a trauma-sensitive yoga school. So it has to do with recovery from traumatic stress, or from post-traumatic stress, or from abusive situations. This area of the body is one that is very often challenged. People lose their voice and they stop communicating because of various reasons. From fear or from being in a very controlling environment, they stop communicating. This causes illness. So this within yoga, there is a clear understanding that when this area of your body gets blocked, it causes things like asthma, high blood pressure, breast lumps. Lower down into the body, it also causes other illnesses. So it is very, very, very important for us from a Western healthcare and a Western education perspective. It's important that that we understand the importance of actually being able to form healthy social bonds and actually be able to communicate from a functional perspective, because without functional communication, we are consistently ending up with conflict and disharmony which is unpleasant for everyone. But then from a yoga perspective and from a holistic health perspective, it's important that we need to keep this area of the body open, because if this shuts down, we then end up with exactly as I just explained now, blockages from here down, which is illness. So I hope this little bit of information, I've given you a lot, in terms of the hormones, the function of the body from a yoga perspective, from a Western healthcare perspective, personal experiences of my own in terms of kind of being shot with words. And so, which is, it's funny that I describe it in that way, because it does come across as particularly aggressive. And when I personally feel like I'm just being showered with vocabulary, my own stress response is to withdraw and almost feel like I hold my breath and I almost run away because I don't cope very well with like very loud, almost like shouting and things like this. I don't cope very well with this. So it's all an interesting cultural experience, and I hope a little bit of what I've shared is useful and relevant and relatable to you. If you have more questions on this and it makes sense to you, or you have more questions for your own personal experience, feel free to email me at info@sallyalife.com, or you can find me on social media via Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Have a lovely day and take care. Bye.